Street Angels is a film that reminds us that sometimes it's not about the story, sometimes it's not about the image, sometimes it's about the song. Street Angels is set in the slums of Shanghai, and it represents the lives of the urban underclass. The film also links this sociology, sometimes quite directly, to national issues, including economic policy and military conflict. The film also features, right from the beginning, music. The most important part of the soundtrack, arguably, is a pair of songs, sung by a young star named Joshen, which have remained popular ever since. So in Street Angels, it's not just about what we see, it's also about what we hear. This module of Chinese film classics focuses on two distinctive elements of Street Angels, sound and socio-political commentary. This is a film that entertains with sounds such as songs, instrumental numbers, sound effects, humorous dialogue, and which also uses sound as a theme to comment on current affairs. In this video, we'll talk about the emergence of sound in the Chinese film industry, about Street Angels' leading lady Joshen, and about the two songs she sings in this film, Song of the Four Seasons, Siji Ge, and Songstress at the Ends of the Earth, Tianya Ge Nu. In the next video, we'll talk more about the other acoustic characters in this film, whose symbolism is tied to sound. In that video, we'll also explore how filmmaker Yan Mujun uses sound and image to make a broader critique, presenting the urban underclass and even China itself as unable to make its voice heard. Recorded sound was first added to film in 1926, and The Jazz Singer from 1927 was the first sound film. Earlier films had often had live musical accompaniment or narration, but this was the first talkie, and as the title implies, The Jazz Singer was also a singy, with several extended song sequences. On-screen singing performances were a sensation, and they quickly developed a whole new genre, the musical film. The Jazz Singer was shown in China in 1929, and the first Chinese sound films were produced in 1931. Films like The Great Road, Da Lu from 1934, which begins with a song, and New Women, Xin Nu Xing from 1935 are silent films that had dubbed sound added later. By the late 1930s, Chinese studios were producing more films that mixed dubbing with live recorded sound, such as the 1937 horror musical Song at Midnight, Ye Ban Ge Sheng. The advent of sound film presented both opportunities and challenges to the Chinese film industry. Now you could add theme songs, and audiences could hear actors' voices. Sound expanded cinema's reach to illiterate audiences who could not read intertitles or subtitles. The problem was that some actors did not speak standard Mandarin, and they needed voice coaching in order to smooth out their accents. The dialogue in late 1930s films, as a result, can sound a little bit stilted. A national language, or Guoyu, was still in the process of being standardized too, so just how to speak was still up in the air. Musical films were extremely popular in the 1930s. Chinese productions included Song of the Fisherman from 1934, March of Youth 1937. These films used music to express the pathos of the disadvantaged and to record the militaristic sounds of the age. Also in 1937, the major studio Lianhua produced a genre sampler called Lianhua Symphony, Lianhua Jiaoxiangqu, using a musical metaphor for filmmaking itself, and representing their studio cast showing the joys of unison singing. In 1927, the same year that The Jazz Singer was released, the writer Yu Dafu quipped that ice cream and cinema are the crystallization of 20th century culture. Both provide mass gratification for a low price. In 1933, another critic claimed that China had two kinds of films: hard films, which forced ideology down the audience's throats, and soft films. Soft films were like ice cream for the eyes and a sofa for the soul. Street Angels offers ice cream for the eyes and ears perhaps, but no sofa for the soul. Its director, Yan Mujun, was a dramatist who believed that art should address present-day social issues, but in Street Angels he offers no happy ending for the angels of Shanghai's streets. Yuan was an actor himself, and he had starred in 1935 film Plunder of Peach and Plum, as well as Children of the Storm, Feng Yun Arnu, a patriotic film in which Yuan sang the song written by 23-year-old composer Nier that later became the national anthem of the People's Republic of China, March of the Volunteers. Street Angels confirms that Yuan appreciated the power of sound, and that, like many of his contemporaries, he tried to use songs to convey social and political messages. 马路天使, as this film is called in Chinese, could be translated as street angel, but I prefer street angels for a couple of reasons. The first reason is to distinguish it from a 1928 Hollywood silent film with dubbed soundtrack called Street Angel, whose leading lady, Janet Gaynor, won an Oscar for Best Actress. Yuan's film draws its title from the earlier film, as well as the story of a young female runaway who ends up on the streets and falls in love with a young man. In the Chinese film, it's a musician rather than a painter. I prefer Street Angels for Yuan's film also because we have a lovable ensemble surrounding Xiaohong, including her sister, a streetwalker who could be viewed as a fallen angel. We'll talk a bit more about them in the next video. For now, let's go over the story. Then we'll talk about Joshen, who is clearly the star of this show. So our story takes place in autumn of 1935. Xiaohong, a young woman in her late teens, and her elder sister Xiaoyun have fled their home in northeast China due to armed conflict and ended up in the slums of Shanghai. There, they live with a couple who run a tea house, or restaurant, and who abuse and exploit them. They compel Xiaohong to sing for customers, and they force Xiaoyun to work as a street-walking prostitute. Xiaohong falls in love with Chen Xiaoping, a poor young man who works occasionally as a musician and who lives across the alley with his friend Wang, who sells newspapers, and 3 other friends who work as barbers. Xiaohong's singing is popular with the tea shop customers, including a thug known as Mr. Gu. At one point, Xiaoping is misled into thinking that Xiaohong has jilted him. Drunk, he forces her to sing for him like any other customer in the tea shop. Xiaohong is distraught, but when she overhears Mr. Gu arranging to buy her from the tea shop proprietor, she escapes from the tea house and, reconciling with Xiaoping, moves with him and his friends to a new apartment. Xiaoping and his friend Wang want to protect Xiaohong by filing a lawsuit, but when they visit a lawyer's office, they discover that legal representation is beyond their means. Xiaoyun, harassed by the police and her foster father, and in love with Wang, wants to move in with them too, but Chen Xiaoping refuses because she's a prostitute. Xiaohong and Xiaoping get married in a common law celebration in their apartment, but the whole group can't afford to pay the rent, and they face eviction. Despite offering a special promotion, the barber shop is also forced to close by a landlord who cites foreign economic pressures. Meanwhile, Xiaohong's foster father and Gu hunt Shanghai for her. They corner Xiaoyun, who refuses to reveal Xiaohong's whereabouts, and the tea shop owner throws a knife at her. Her friends and Xiaohong find her, but she dies just as Wang returns to report there wasn't enough money. The doctor wouldn't come. Now let's talk about Joshen and her character, the Songstress. Joshen was then just 19 years old, and Street Angels was her breakout film. It's her most celebrated film of the 40-something films she would appear in over the course of her career. In 1937, she had already been performing for 5 years as the member of a famous song and dance troupe led by Li Jinhui, and she was promoted as the Golden Voice. Joshen went on to become a major star across Sinophone Asia and Southeast Asia, where her songs were on constant rotation for much of the 1940s and 1950s. Her rendition of Song of the Four Seasons appears repeatedly as a symbol of old Shanghai in Wang Anyi's celebrated novel Song of Everlasting Sorrow, 长恨歌, from 1995. In the 1930s, Chinese audiences flocked to the cinema to hear and watch Joshen sing. And indeed, Street Angels provides instant gratification. The first song from her begins just 7.5 minutes into the film. Zhou's character, the Songstress, is a central figure in Street Angels' lower-class urban cultural tableau. In late 19th and early 20th century China, the Songstress was part of an urban entertainment economy in which one could go to a restaurant, a wine shop, or a tea house and order a song to go with one's meal or one's drink. But Xiaohong's songs do more than just provide a sense of realism. They also narrate stories of woe in a lyrical mode, presenting suffering as cyclical, repetitive, and personal. Song of the Four Seasons is a sentimental love song of love, parting, and longing. In 4 stanzas which follow the 4 seasons from spring through to winter, it narrates the experience of a maiden who is suddenly separated from her lover by a heartless blow, and who must flee south of the Yangtze River, where she dreams of home, her parents, and her man, whom she imagines suffering in the frozen north. She hopes to send him winter clothing that she has made, and she compares herself to the legendary devoted wife, Meng Jiang, whose husband died as a corvée laborer on the Great Wall, and whose weeping caused the wall to collapse. As Xiaohong sings the Song of the Four Seasons, the sound of her voice is accompanied by images of the girl she sings of, who is revealed to be herself. We also see the war that she is fleeing. So Xiaohong's character sings of herself and sings of others like her. As she sings, we also see images of the audience in the tea house who are listening to her, so that we are both listeners and spectators watching listeners, notably the predatory thug Mr. Gu, who later tries to buy her. Songstress at the Ends of the Earth is another song of love and loss. Like Song of the Four Seasons, it may be enjoyed on its own just as a good song, but also has a narrative function as a sonic motif that unites the romantic leads, Xiaohong and Chen Xiaoping, played by the heartthrob Zhao Dan. Xiaohong sings it for him from her window as he accompanies her on the erhu from across the alleyway. Visually, each of them appear alone in certain shots, but the sound that they make together unites them as lovers. They're playing their song, you could say, and in rapturous harmony, but the birdcage that Xiaohong holds in her hand during part of the scene, and the lyrics about tears and parting, foreshadow the entrapment and pain to come. Sure enough, shortly thereafter we hear the song again in very different circumstances. Xiaoping becomes convinced that Xiaohong has agreed to marry the thug Mr. Gu, and Xiaoping comes to the tea house and orders a song, forcing Xiaohong to sing for him like she would for any other customer. In his depression, he perversely reduces the relationship to a mere commercial transaction. In the sequence of Xiaohong singing Songstress at the Ends of the Earth for Xiaoping in the tea house, sound design and image design work together. Yuan Muzhi pairs close miking of the girl's voice with close-up shots of both lovers, as well as with superimposed images of the earlier scene of their happy duet. When Xiaohong sings the words "my man," we see Xiaoping's face in close-up. As the song progresses, the camera distance gets closer and closer to Xiaoping's face, creating a sense of increasing emotional intimacy and anguish. She sings "my man, oh through hard times our love runs deep." At that point, the drunk Xiaoping abruptly strikes the table with his fists and stands up to leave. Xiaohong doesn't even get to the lines, "This little sister is like a thread, and you are the needle. We are threaded together, and we'll never part." Earlier, when Xiaohong sang Song of the Four Seasons, we heard the lyrics, "Suddenly the lovers are separated by a heartless blow," as a montage of visual images show the violence of war. Now, Songstress at the Ends of the Earth is cut short by the heartless blow of the male lover. A songstress or genü like Xiaohong would take pains to distinguish herself from a prostitute or jinü by telling customers, "I may sell smiles, but I don't sell my body." Xiaohong and Xiaoyun, a songstress and a prostitute, are a pair. Together, they represent the precariousness and vulnerability of women. Mr. Gu, the thug who has designs on Xiaohong, leers at her as he plucks the petals off of a flower in his hand and then tramples the petals underfoot. This is an image that actually appeared 2 years earlier in the film New Women. His presence represents how easily a songstress could be forced to become a prostitute in a place like Shanghai. These moving scenes might obscure that Street Angels is also shaped by industry factors. As Xiaohong sings, animated words also appear at the bottom of the screen, along with a bouncing ball that tracks the lyrics, much like in karaoke. This feature encourages literate moviegoers to learn the words, to commit the song to memory, and perhaps, after watching the film, even to go out and buy a copy of the record. So songs in Street Angels are partly a product of a close and mutually beneficial industry relationship between cinema, radio, and the gramophone. In the next video, we'll focus on how director Yan Mujun, like other socially minded artists of his day, incorporated sound and the idea of sound into social and political criticism. It's nice to listen to pleasing melodies, But these artists also wanted us to think about sound in other ways, especially whom art should speak for, what it should say, and how it should give voice to the voiceless.